Hi everyone. Great to meet you all. I'm Monica Gauci and I'm in Australia. And yeah, I guess I've practiced yoga, meditation all of my adult life, which is quite a long time. I'm 65 next week. And then I trained as a chiropractor about 20 years ago. And I think that certainly has had a huge influence on my yoga teaching. And so I guess, I've gotten to the point where I see myself more as a yoga educator than a yoga teacher, although I'm obviously a yoga teacher within that educational role. So I think that's sort of my passion. I feel that yoga teachers need to be more educated about human beings, not just their bodies, but their minds and their spirits as well. So, yeah.
And I met Monica because Monica came into Megan's training with Dina. And
That's right.
and Megan said, "Oh, Mom, you have to meet Monica. She has so much information. She took so many notes, and
Hmm.
a lot of the things that Monica was sharing were things that I had been experiencing at the time, especially during menopause and perimenopause. So the next time I came to visit, I rang her up and went to visit
You
her at
braved
her
our
beautiful home.
driveway.
Yeah. That amazing driveway, very long driveway, very
We have
beautiful
a
house.
famous driveway. It's 2.5 kilometers long and very steep.
Oh,
So,
beautiful.
yeah, it's not your average driveway.
Genny.
Nice to meet you all. I am Genny Wilkinson. I am in London, but my accent is a giveaway. I'm originally from New York to sing Ashtanga. I had to write to peg my bio, and I'm like, been a long time since I've been practicing. Maybe not as, I don't know how long you guys have, but since I think 99 or 98. And my practice has just changed over the years, from being strong and dynamic to being a little bit less. It's just adapted to what's ever happening in my life, kids or perimenopause and menopause. And yeah, now I was teaching quite a bit up until the point where I opened a studio myself, and I just consider that a different form of teaching because I'm supporting a lot of teachers. So I'm not going to say anything bad because that won't have to have gotten to the podcast. They're probably going to listen to this, but we have a Mysore program here. That's, I think it's the biggest in the country. And we also have a strong guest teacher program. So Kino and Tim come a lot, and David Swenson. Saraswati's coming next month, just a different stage in my life. And yeah, that's me.
You're a journalist.
Yes, yes. In a past life, yes, I used to work for Reuters and Time Magazine and Dow Jones. So I still utilize those skills when I can.
All right, Tara.
Nice to meet everybody. Let's see. I started, actually, I've always been fascinated with the human mind. And I think before even I got into yoga for 10 years, I was looking at Western psychology, the human mind, behavior, how I was interacting in the world. And my father's from Hyderabad, so I'm half Indian, but I grew up in Canada. And so, yes, there's little books around, and we just played with postures when we were younger, but didn't really start to get into, and grew up hearing stories about Krishna, Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana, all these things. But it wasn't until I used to be a multi-unit restaurant director. This was a very intense job, and so I was in that for 20 years. And while I was within this career, I started practicing yoga. Yeah, I started practicing yoga for stability. Yeah, so let's see, I've been practicing for, I don't know, 21, the physical practice of it after looking at the mind. So it's been basically a 36-year exploration. Yeah, some on the mat. And just, watching the evolution of my practice to, as Peg and I were talking, I kind of have this forever student. As much as I'm a teacher and all of my students are teachers, I'm still a student. I'm still with my teachers 6 days a week. So um, I studied yoga therapy in the Krishnamacharya lineage, and I still do all of the Vedic chanting. I've had a teacher that's been a Vedic priest for a decade, and spend it's probably 2 to 3 days a week with him. So all the stuff from wearing white and making ghee and putting it in my puja room to anything you can possibly imagine to animal rescue. And then I met my husband in Mysore, who's a chiropractor as well, and he's British, so I happen to end up in England. So we live here now, and when I'm home and trying not to travel as much, I try to do a lot less travel. Then, yeah, that's basically what I do. So, um, in the process, just continually learning. I can't say anything other than that. I enjoy the process and more Antaranga yoga these days.
Where are you based, Tara?
I'm in Hampshire. Yeah. Yeah, so about an hour from London. Yeah, right on the train. It's quite easy. Yeah.
So, Katy.
Everyone. So I know Tara a little bit. We've met a few times and had some nail sessions together. Yeah, so I think I'm probably the newest practitioner of everyone here. I've been doing some form of yoga for about 12 years, but my entry into yoga was I used to do a lot of sport and running, and when I got pregnant, I thought I was going to pee myself every time I went for a run, so I had to make a bit of a segue into something else. And my sister's best friend's mother took me to her yoga class. And it was me and everyone 65 and above. And I was really impressed by how much fitter and flexible and how much happier they all seemed to be than I was. And that was how I started with yoga. And then from that studio, there was an Ashtanga teacher. So I started led Ashtanga 6 weeks after giving birth, which in hindsight is a really stupid idea, but that's how I ended up in Ashtanga yoga. And then since then, I've gone back and forth to Mysore a few times, also authorized, but let's see how much longer we talk about that. And I'm currently living in Germany, where I have a Mysore program. I try and travel when I can. And yeah, with everything that's been going on, I'm a little bit lost in the ether of direction with practice. Practice is changing, definitely. Priorities are shifting. So everything's a little bit in flux for me at the moment with my Ashtanga, but still going, just.
I met Katy in Miami when I was there practicing with Sharat, and she was just assisting. And I had hurt my knee. I'd come and my dog had just died, and India just died, and I was devastated. And I was really just kind of broken in so many ways. But I still showed up, and I don't know why, but I did. And I guess it was all for good reasons. And I just remember Katy came over. I'll tell you this really quick story. Katy comes over to help me in Utita. And because my knee had really hurt, and I don't think she knew that, but when she came over and she was holding me, and I realized at one point I was holding onto her waist, not mine. And it didn't realize until it was over, and I said, "Oh my God, I'm sorry, I was holding onto you." And she said, "You can hold on to whatever you want." And I loved her immediately after that. Like that was a beautiful thing. It was exactly what I needed, was to be held. And so I have, it was an immediate bond, and I really appreciated that in that moment. And that's what a teacher does to me. For me, that's like what we do. So I just will give you this brief thing. You all know I have a master's in psychological services and a bachelor's in psychology. So really, I'm a trained therapist, not a podcaster. Yoga was just something that came along and seemed to be really a good complement to everything that I was doing, and I switched over. The podcast bored me. I really didn't want to do it anymore. I had stopped doing it. But then these conversations seemed so good and fun, and actually came at the perfect time. So right now, these conversations are more relevant than ever. All right. And that's why I'm doing it now. So for no other reason. Can you all hear her in the background? I hope not.
I don't mind that.
A little bit,
Good.
but she's
She's definitely making some wonderful noises with her. All right. So I asked a student some questions that they wanted to ask. So I figured and it's funny because there were a lot of the same ones that I had written to you, but she said it so much better. So if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to read to you one of the things that the question that she starts off with. Ready? She says, this is Oana. Oana says, I'd be curious to know how the relationship to the practice evolved through different transitions like pregnancy, postpartum, menopause, aging, and other life changes involving something physical. And I thought that was really, I mean, right amongst us, we have, Genny, you practiced through your pregnancies. Um, all of us have definitely cycled. As a woman, I will admit, I ignored mine. I'm 59 and of a generation that you did everything a man could do better. You did not let anything about you as a woman, it looked like limitations, things that would hold you back. So to me, I worked through just normal business as usual. It wasn't until menopause, probably perimenopause, I did business as usual. It wasn't until the year leading up to menopause that I really actually listened. So it was a tough lesson for me. And it was a beautiful lesson for me because I think, as I've told you before, it opened up the softer side of me, which was a beautiful thing, not a weakness. But I think I'd been conditioned to believe that it was indeed a weakness. So it took a long time for me. Luckily, I'm a lifelong learner. So it was a gift, as I've said. But that's just a brief thing for you. I'll open it up to you. Would anybody else like to share?
I'll start because you were mentioning babies. So I'm kind of the generation of you, Peg. I'm 53, and it was you carry on. You wouldn't even discuss periods or menstruation or menopause. It was very much kept in the background. And when I had my four kids, I remember when I first pregnancy, Rolf Nakajeta was in Singapore, and he's like, I told him I was pregnant. He said, you should not be practicing. I'm like, what are you talking about? That was first trimester. I'm like, of course you're going to practice. But he absolutely refused to let me. And then I, came back into the second and the third trimesters and with the subsequent children. And I actually found it was fine. I think I returned to practice a little too quickly. Like Katy, you were talking about earlier. I think I was back in the Mysore room 3 weeks after giving birth, which I do not recommend, but it felt okay at the time. This is back in like 2003 or something. And again, Peg, what you were saying, it's like you just got on with it and you were supposed to be a strong woman and nothing held you back. So that was how I approached it. Then by the time I had my fourth baby, I have to say that this is really bad. I didn't even tell my teacher I was pregnant because I did not want to be sent away from the Mysore room. And I was doing, and he could tell. He's like, what's going on? I'm like, nothing at all. And I was doing, third series. And then I said to him, by the way, yes, I'm pregnant. This is in like the 12th week. He's like, why didn't you tell me before? I'm like, I didn't know. I mean, it's a total lie. So I kind of, I ignored it. And I think I came out of it pretty lucky in the sense that I had really healthy children and my recoveries were okay. But I think I was an exception rather than the rule. And I would, it depends on the woman, I think, but I would not recommend anybody did what I did.
I've heard that though from women who have said that that the opposite, that once they said they were pregnant, all of a sudden it was like they just became invisible. And I think it's like a fear of working with a woman during that time or whatever. But, a lot of women have said to me that it was hard, like saying it was almost like the spotlight was on them and they felt very isolated and alone.
Yeah. And I'm not sure there was at that time, there was no real guidelines about what needed to be done. I know Anna Wise had written a book about it, Yoga Sadhana for Women, that was really helpful. But that came like, I think it was, I'm not sure, but well after my fourth was born. But it felt like there was guidelines from within the Ashtanga community about how to approach your practice when you're pregnant, or even if you had a miscarriage, or even afterwards. And I thought that book was quite helpful. But you're right, Peg, up until that time, people didn't know what to do.
Yeah, it's true. Katy, I know you came in right after. You started yoga.
Yeah, I started yoga during pregnancy, but it was kind of more of a vinyasa setting. And to be honest, my reasoning for starting yoga was, one, I couldn't do the high impact sports. Well, I mean, I probably could have, but I didn't feel like I wanted to. Maybe it was a good excuse not to do it. But I didn't want to do that. And on the other side, I just moved back to Scotland at the time, and I was really lonely. So for me, the yoga class ended up being, I think it was the cup of coffee at the end in the cafe that made me go so frequently for the conversations. But yeah, I started Ashtanga about 6 weeks after. And I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, now in hindsight, watching people come through pregnancy as a teacher and coming back to class afterwards, it's definitely not something that I would recommend to do. But for my body, I think I was pretty young. I think I was 25 or 26 when I gave birth. So, I mean, maybe not so young, but by kind of European standards, yes. So I don't really feel that there was an effect of doing that. The only thing I would say in hindsight maybe wasn't a physical issue with going into Ashtanga, but it was more of like the the kind of the commitment that was asked. When you have a 6-week baby at home and you have a partner and then you're like, right, by the way, I'm off at 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning, I'm going to leave and go and practice. I think that was the beginning of maybe um, that relationship with Ashtanga and maybe even feeling like, I really want to get into this practice. I don't know if I'm expressing myself, but I think that might have been the beginning of a slightly unhealthy relationship with commitment and prioritizing for me with the practice.
I'm just going to pause this right there. Monica, your storage is low, and so it stopped recording you. So what does that say? Your or yeah, let me does anybody who's really computer literate here, anybody I'm just going to open up a new window and ask how to delete computer storage.
Is it uploading to the computer or is it uploading to a cloud?
No.
Monica, do you have several other things running on your laptop or computer right now that you could shut down? I don't know if that would make a difference. That's what I did.
Yeah, that might be it. So here's what I'm gonna have you do. You're gonna exit and then come back and see. Let's see what happens there. Uh, okay, Monica, how's that going?
Yeah, so far, all good.
Okay, fantastic.
Good.
I'm terrified of losing Monica again. So I'm gonna hop to another subject because it's how Monica and I met. And it's something that I was really hoping she could speak to a little bit more. And that is the whole perimenopause, menopause. What Monica didn't know was when when Monica came to speak to Dina's group and Megan was there, you mentioned, Monica, something about shoulder issues with women during perimenopause. And at the time, I had some major shoulder issues going on and was in perimenopause. And it was I had just never heard anything like this. No one had ever said anything. And ever since I have been seeing women through perimenopause with shoulder issues.
Yeah, not just
Can you
shoulder.
speak to a little bit about this?
Yeah, it's very, very common just because of the hormonal changes that we go through when you consider how our estrogen and progesterone levels drop, and especially estrogen is not. We most of us know that estrogen's really important for our bones, our bone density, strength, quality. But it's important for all of our tissues. And so I think the statistic, don't quote me on this, is something like 80% of perimenopausal, menopausal women will have musculoskeletal problems. So it's not just shoulders. I think as Ashtanga yoga practitioners, maybe we experience it first, foremost in our shoulders because we do a lot of upper body work, and as females we tend to not have the same strength in that area of our body that males naturally do just because of the way that we're built. So yeah, it's really, really common. And I'm just preparing my manual for our next training, which is all about upper limb, lower limb problems. And when you look at all of those problems and you look at the where it happens most commonly, it's usually in women who are 50, around 50 and above. And frozen shoulder, rotator cuff injuries, all of them, basically. So yeah, it's an issue. And although I think it's very individual, I think it's really important for women to get their hormone levels checked and to decide whether or not they want to supplement with hormones. I know there's been a lot of there's been a real lack of information about hormone replacement therapy. And there's a lot of new information out now that is actually very supportive and is finding that supplementing with estradiol, which is just one of the types of hormones that we have, and progesterone are actually very protective for a lot of issues, unless, of course, you are in a high risk category, which is why it's so important just to, treat it on a very individual basis. But it certainly does help to protect all of our tissues, our soft tissues, our bones. Yeah. So because
you brought up something interesting about the practice itself and the stress that, the different shape of the bodies of women, right? And I've always thought, how many of you have thought with Karandavasana, right? They always say, oh, a woman doesn't have to lift. And I remember being, as a woman, I would think, I don't want no special pass. You know what I mean? And now I'm realizing, actually, yes, like the largest part of me is below me and the smallest part of me is above me. And so structurally, there are a lot of things that didn't make sense. I remember I was in Dina's class and I was doing a transition and she walked over to me and she said, who taught you that? A man or a woman? And I remember sitting there and I thought, and I knew then it was not a woman. But when I went to go tell her, she was gone. But it really made me think, oh, yeah, right. And so I remember leaving there thinking to myself, the way I was practicing, that transition didn't make sense for me, but that I'd only been taught by men.
Yeah, my favorite one is when usually men will, because let's face it, yoga, whether it's Ashtanga Vinyasa or not, is predominantly females. We're predominantly a female population that are practicing. I don't know, Peg, you probably know better than me, whether that's because the females tend to do self-care better or what the reason is, but we are mainly females. And I love it when people will say that the being able to do the vinyasa transitions without your feet touching the floor is all to do with the bandhas. Like there's some holy method that is the cure-all for everything, especially a good vinyasa. But when you look at it, it's mainly, I've taught hundreds of beginners how to do vinyasas. And most males who have never heard of the word bandha can do them quite well, easily, first time. And most females, not all, struggle. And usually the ones who don't are already very strong in their upper body because they've done gymnastics or are swimmers or are climbers or something where they've used their upper body a lot. So.
Or body composition as well, isn't it? There's the reality of
Totally.
if you're a curvier practitioner, for example, and you have a different weight distribution to shift back and forward, that's going to affect a transition. But I had the same situation with my husband. I remember he'd never done a minute of yoga in his life. And I thought, just out of curiosity, would you cross your legs and lift up? And there he went, legs crossed, hands down, lifted up and floated back. I thought, all right, okay. That's where we are.
Equally as frustrating for them that, women tend to have much softer bodies and it's easier for us to access our flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I'm definitely a feminist, so I don't think that I'm being sexist in describing that, but it is our general body composition, and of course we're not all alike.
No. And Monica, to what you were talking about before, I mean, Peg knows this, that I have frozen shoulder. And I, just been coming on to 2 years now, and it did probably coincide with about the time that I started to move into menopause. And it was interesting to see my reaction to it because, having practiced quite strict Ashtanga over the years, I was actually really fine with it. I was saying, oh, thank God, something's going to slow me down. There was something quite releasing about that. And I've kind of embraced it, and I just built it into my practice, and I don't see it as an injury. I just see it as a part of me, and it may fade, it may not fade. It's just who I am. But it's good that I think we talk about this, because for me, this is the first time in my life, and I'm quite physically able. So for the first time in my life to like hit something that was a proper brick wall in front of me, I chose not to plow through it, even if, I mean, I don't think I could, but it was really nice to have something, stop me. I felt relief, weirdly. I'm like, oh, this is fine. This is fine.
And frozen shoulder is a classic example because 80% of women who get frozen shoulder often have some like subclinical, not strong enough that you could measure it yet in a blood test, something going on with either their thyroid function, sometimes it's metabolic, but it's usually often we'll see frozen shoulder as a symptom of something else that is going on in the body. So I think, our hormones obviously do play a huge role in what's happening with our tissues, not to mention our mental state,
Mm.
our emotional state as well. So, yeah. And I think that's where other practices like Tara, I'm very much into Vedic chanting, also from the Desikachar tradition. And I think it's very dogmatic to believe that our yoga is only asana. It's one of the 8 limbs. And so there's so much else that we can do when we can't, because I've had lots of things happen, fracturing my wrist in the garden and just so many times where I just haven't been able to do an Ashtanga vinyasa practice. But for me, Ashtanga yoga isn't the one limb of asana. It's actually all of the 8 limbs, including the first 2.
Mhm.
And so I no longer feel limited. But the first time it ever happened to me where I couldn't do my normal practice, I was devastated. And it was a really great check-in. And I remember actually asking myself, so why do I practice yoga? Do I practice yoga because I can do everything? Or do I practice yoga because I actually have a commitment to being the best version of myself, both on and off my mat? And yeah, it was very confronting and I think very necessary. And I think it's probably a good thing for everyone to go through where they just can't do their normal practice at some
Yeah.
time and have to really examine their motivation.
I think those are some of the most incredible moments, throughout life, throughout our practice, is when we can't do the practice. And I remember tearing my ACL in half, and I was off the mat. There's no possibility, and I had to wait for the surgery. And at that time, I was a beast. I have to say, I was a former runner. I was very athletic. I could do any postures. I was strictly going in, and I loved the practice so much, and I loved the intention. But was I paying attention to my breath? Was I paying attention to my movement? Was I actually practicing yoga, or was I going in at it as a sport? And so I love what you're saying, Monica, because I remember when I tore my ACL, I was like, okay, well, now what? I had already been doing other practices as well, but not within such depth. But there was an ashrama, and there it was. So for 6 months, I got on my crutches and went to the ashram and just sat there and did a meditation every morning. And that was at 5 a.m. It was still the same time, so it was comfortable, but um, just being able to move through that experience. And when I came back to the mat, I was so much more humble. It was
Mm,
so different. Yeah,
mm,
I really, everything I did was so different and it
yeah,
just didn't matter anymore. And I used
yeah,
props and it didn't, and I slowly got back and, through that whole transition, it didn't matter if I was in Padmasana, it didn't matter. Well, I did push that a bit, but and it's very comfortable, but I mean, if I'm going to be honest, but, but just getting back in that space and really coming in with a freshness, with a newness that, okay,
mm,
here's my body. I'm actually really connecting to what I'm doing instead of just flailing and moving. I'm looking at my breath. I'm not so obsessed with this alignment or this foot placement, but I'm actually able to listen to what my body requires. I'm able to know when it's just enough. Yeah. And like you
What's
said that, sorry.
I was just to add on to that, Tara, I was going to
Hmm.
say that I manage a lot of teachers in my position, and the best ones, in my opinion, are the ones who have gone through injury, because those injuries have taught them so much, and it has taught them how to be empathetic and to respond to people who are in front of them. So I see that really clearly, that the success of a teacher, as measured by connection, how their classes are, can be often pegged on and injuries that they have suffered, that they have had
Hmm.
to personally go through in order to understand, just as you did with your ACL. It is your greatest teacher, I think.
Yeah, physically and mentally. Yeah. I mean, with all of those things yeah, I believe it. And like you were saying, Monica, I mean, when we look at asana pranayama, this is 5% of yoga. And so often we get so caught on it, right? The tangible. So this is tangible, it's wonderful, but that's not the practice. That is never meant to be the practice. And when we pull out the rest of it, the yama niyama, I mean, where does it start, right? We start with ahimsa. And what happens? How many of us are actually with the self-talk, with the self-movement, just everything that we're doing, starting just in that space? How many people are practicing ahimsa? Never mind off the mat, just even on the mat. Yeah.
Absolutely on the mat. And I think that's potentially our biggest enemy, is to feel that this coercion and this sense that we have to achieve a certain amount or achieve a certain level. And I've always felt this was the biggest flaw with the Ashtanga Vinyasa practice, is that it's designed in such a way that you're rewarded by the next posture. And even the certification process is based on ability. I know I've really criticized this whole ableism before. I just feel like it's the wrong way to be measuring yogis. I mean, I saw the same thing at university. The people who were rewarded were the people who had the best memories. It wasn't if you were the best person, the kindest practitioner, the person who could really tune in and have empathy for their patient. It was just how you were able to regurgitate and pass an exam. And that's what you were scored on. So,
This
Yeah,
was
I think
something
the
that
modern,
Katie and I talked about in Miami. And because we just chatted after she did that beautiful Otita supportive assist with me, we chatted as we walked, and I was telling her how I was sharing with her how many women I see hidden in the backs of rooms practicing primary series, older women who maybe couldn't stand up, but like decades. And one of the things that I did find going through menopause and perimenopause was I was lucky. Spinal extension, uplift. I actually dropped out and went into primary series because I could do that well. And I was too scared to do anything that I couldn't do perfectly. So I stayed there at first, probably as a good reason, right? First, I went there because I needed some rest and I needed something that was just nice and rhythmic. but then it became safe. And it also became heavy. All that forward folding, I didn't realize at a certain point it was really restful. And then somewhere along the line, it became really depressing. And like I just kind of, so I stayed there too long. I was too scared. Once I finally dipped my toe, once I finally realized, oh, I may need some uplift here, a little bit more energy, and started doing some of intermediate and started integrating that back into my practice, it was night and day. And I realized there are a lot of women over 50 sitting in backs of rooms, not even just over 50, just a lot of women who just get forgotten in primary series. And so I was telling Katy this, and would you share just some of what you said to me at that point?
Yeah, I mean, from my own practice point of view, I joke about things, but I I am a very mediocre physical practitioner, very much so. And I never had. I'm quite different, I think, from many of you in the sense that I'd never had the competitive with myself. I was never an ambitious practitioner. I was always a self practitioner. I saw practice with Sharaji, and then I'd go home and practice. And I think this made a little bit of a difference the way I try and approach the practice now, and how I try and teach as well. I never had the experience practicing, especially in Mysore, where I was held back from my practice. In fact, does not that it matters at all, but I was authorized with what I still consider a very mediocre practice. But I think from my side, I think what was seen from the outside was I showed up, I practiced every day, I managed my life. Right. And this is what we talk about, where does the female element of Ashtanga come in? If I can practice, if I can raise a child, if I can work, if I can look after my dogs, if I can keep my house relatively clean, I've achieved a fantastic practice because my life is relatively balanced. Right. And I think that's what was seen from the outside, from Sharaji anyway, of this is somebody who is showing up in whatever state they're in and doing the best that they can, and hopefully with kindness, like not just to myself, but to those around me. And I think this is a quality that's really forgotten in our practice. If you have a student in particular, I have one student who I love very much, but she has 3 kids at home and she has a job, and I think she does a lot more than her husband may do in the household. And she shows up and does the best that she can. Ashtanga's not her number one priority in her life, right? It's never going to be. So holding her back in positions, this really just doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me.
What really struck me by that, and so how old are you, Katy? Do you mind me asking?
I'm 38 soon, in a couple of months.
And I see that, and it gives me such great joy and hope, because I see this in my daughter as well, who's in her 30s. She doesn't hold the same kind of expectations that I did as I practiced through and as I aged. She actually is way more balanced and healthy in those respects. And I do see another generation coming through that is very, very different from my generation, that there's definitely that which is really a lovely thing to see. And that's how things shift, right? That's the shifting that's happening. I remember somebody saying our daughters stand on our shoulders. So maybe I had to be strong and kind of bully my way through things or whatever, so that she could now not have to. But it's really lovely to see that belief system kind of coming through.
What do you think the change has been? I mean, I'm curious about this. What's the difference between my generation of practitioner, if you want to call it generational, to yours?
You want me to speak to it?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, it wasn't until 1970 here that a woman could even apply for a loan. When I went to college, my mother said to me, "You can do anything a man can do, and you will." And so the deal was, when women got to work, was you had to still hold the home down and do the job, and you could not. And so I was raised with that. I was the first generation of women that could work. they could actually have a job. And so my mother went to college, but she couldn't accept the one from her scholarship. She had to go to one close to home because you weren't allowed to go away to college. So we were raised with this, and I don't know, anybody that's kind of an over 50 might feel this way. We were raised with this belief system that you don't show weakness. You can do it all, and you can do it all perfectly, actually. And so I don't think when you ask my parents what their goal for me was as a parent, it would have been that you will be able to support yourself, that you won't need a man. That was kind of the thing, both my dad too. With my daughter, I feel like those strides have been made. So if I were to say what my goal was for her, it'd be for her to be happy. For her, like that doesn't seem as big a goal. And actually going through menopause, Megan went through it with me, which was really lovely. Like she took care of me through it. I thought that wasn't a terrible thing. It was a beautiful thing that she got to see me be able to rest, and she was able to step up, and it really brought our relationship to a different level, I would say, much different level. But I will, that's where I think the generational thing is. We were raised differently than the next generation is raised. So I don't think it necessarily has to do with Ashtanga, but I think Ashtanga definitely, it
Well, that's been
poked.
through its own, generational changes with Patabi Joyce being much stricter than Sharat. And even he, mellowed as he aged. So, yeah, I agree with you as well, Peg, that it's more of a generational thing rather than so much like it permeated all aspects of us being brought the way that we've been brought up.
It's funny how you talk about softening with Patabi and Sharat as well. I heard so many conversations around Sharaji anyway about in his later years he softened, but the dialogue has always been, well, not always, that's generalizing, but was often that was seen as like a negative thing. He was much softer in his later years. Thank goodness. I mean, like, if after all those years of teaching you haven't softened, something's gone a little awry. But even that mentality was still there of soft equals bad. I don't know. That was my
good, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm team soft completely. But
because Krishnamacharya was as hard as nails. He was really tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
He was definitely, but I think that's part of the discipline, right? And I think a lot of my teachers have put me through that rigorous training. Like my chanting teachers and my teachers have been really, really, really tough. It's basically to make sure that you can hold this.
Yes.
I'm going to teach you something. I'm going to give you something. Are you going to do something with this correctly? As opposed to I'm not going to be able to understand. And most of my teachers have done that from the yoga therapy side, from the chanting in the Krishnamacharya tradition, all like that. And even, and testing. Even Saraswati tested me. So I practiced with Shrat for years. I mean, he was never tough to me. I'm not very far from age. We're 3 years apart. Yeah, so I'm also 50 and in perimenopause. So I completely relate with what everyone's talking about and the last few years of what I've been looking at. But, when I made that switch from practicing with Sharat and before it was Tim Miller and Johnny Smith, like all these old school teachers, I hadn't planned to practice with Saraswati. I hadn't planned to move into this female environment. It just sort of naturally went there. I knew one of the things that seems so strange, but I couldn't figure out the opening chant for years. I couldn't find that voice, that om, and I was like, the tone. I just couldn't find it until Saraswati stood up on that stage, and she just with such grace and power. She just like in her like Stira Sukham and everything, right? And in that way she chanted was just so beautiful. And she is a very powerful woman. So I went there for the summer, and that's when Sharat and Saraswati were teaching together. I was assisting her, and then I just asked her at the end. I said, Mataji. I said, I'm going to go back to practice with Sharat in September. I'm living in Mysore. And I said, however, you're supposed to have one teacher. So what happens? And she looked at me very clearly and she's like, good question, Tara. Very good. You're my student and you stay with me. And I didn't even waver. I didn't think about it. And she really took this system of like Gurukul, like the ancient training, but without the walls. Yeah, where you go and you study with your teacher and they watch everything. She knew everything. She knew what I ate. She knew where I went. She knew what I cooked. She knew who I spent time with. Every single thing she knew. She was asking, she was watching, and she would test me on Shastra. She'd come up in the middle of the class and whoever practiced with her would know she'd like to sing the Mahaganesha Pancharatnam. And she'd be like, Tara, from beginning to end. I'm like, what? While I'm assisting in the middle of the room, I'm like, okay. And so there
Did you
was
go to
just
Sharat then, or did you stay with Saraswati?
I stayed with
Did you?
Saraswati. Yeah, and I saw Sharat. There was that comfort, but I had spoken to Sharat, and yeah, I mean,
Was
I
that the
have
right
to.
thing? Are you happy with that decision?
Yeah, absolutely, because that attention, that experience was. Saraswati and I are very close. It's a very unusual bond that we have. Even just now when Sharat passed, I sat with her. Like I was there on November 12th and I sat next to her for 8 days and morning, night. And it's like no time passed. And we just have something very, very special. She would joke and teach me everything. She'd tell me all the rituals and say, I don't know why I'm telling you this. It's like, don't worry, Ma, I'll take care of it. But there was such a power and there was such a grace. What I really remember is, I mean, Saraswati was tough. Yeah. But at the same time, she would put her hand on my waist before backbending and she'd look at me and she'd say, period is coming. And I'd be like, oh, thank God. Because there I was doing, my 15 headstands, Rishikasana. And I was like, oh, that means I'm like, Ma, can a break today? She's like, okay. You do a bit. And like, so she'd pretend, she'd try to be a little bit tough, but she'd also back off. And, yeah, just so beautiful how she understood, how she knew these different parts. And yeah, it was very different practicing with her than and for such a long period of time than all the male teachers. I mean, they were great, but it wasn't about postures. It was something much more, and it was just everything. It was a holistic practice. She wanted to know everything. She wanted to understand. So I think, yeah, it was just a very, very different. I don't regret my experience. I often wondered, and all of my friends were saying, what are you doing? Why is this? And, you should be going there. And why would you choose that? And the students that would come and practice with Saraswati, then they'd be looking at me and see the practice and theoretically say, why don't you practice with Sharat? I'm like, yeah, Aman's good. What's wrong with her? So because there's this idea that just because she was a woman, that she wasn't good to practice, that she was too soft, which was in fact, she was harder than any other teacher that I'd ever had.
So are we saying that women Ashtanga teachers approach it differently than male Ashtanga teachers, or the same? Because you would argue, Tara, from what I'm hearing, that because she was tough on you, there is no distinction between hard and soft being male or female. Is it student dependent? Do the good teachers understand by the student who's in front of him the approach that they need, whether that's disciplined or?
Well, that's exactly the concept, right? Isn't that it, right? That's the whole concept of Krishnamacharya. Understand the student in front of you, teach the person in front of you. And that is it. Because no, of course not. If we look at, I've done a lot of research for Mysore in 1954 and when Krishnamacharya when Patabi was at Mysore Palace. And I've interviewed everybody that I possibly know to try to understand what happened with the system. Yeah, and what switched, what changed, why it became this way. And it's because there was pranayama that was incorporated, there was shastra study, there was a lot of different things, there was chanting, and all of a sudden it just became this physical practice, and all of the other things were taken out. And now, like, chanting's just thrown out the window. Let's just take this, and it doesn't matter if I've been practicing 20 years. I don't know how to say the opening mantra still. Like, what's happened, right? And so, where's the respect and understanding of the practice as a whole? So I don't know if she taught necessarily as a man. I was different, and I understand, like, our relationship was something different. And I think she understood that she taught me as I needed to be taught. She checked my ego. She tested everything. Like, she would, in the middle of the room, she'd be seeing if I'm adjusting someone. You, not like that. I'm like, I've been adjusting like this for 2 years, the same posture. And then she did it 3 times. And on the third team, she's like, very good. I'm like, okay. I was like, like, what? And then I looked and I said, what happened? And I thought about it for a bit and I said, my God, she's testing my ego. She wanted to see if I was going to crack. And so it's so beautiful, so many different nuances in that space. So I don't know if I can say I can't compare the two. I think each teacher is individual and we all take the practice and we teach it in our own way and we'll bring our own personalities within it. And like I said, I hadn't planned on practicing with Saraswati. It just naturally happened. But when I was there, she was so powerful and so elegant at the same time. And I really loved that. I liked to watch her as a practitioner and a person and just the way she interacted. Yeah,
What an
someone went up.
experience.
Yeah, beautiful. Like even just the way she was as a human being. And I think that was what was graceful and what not was. She is there. Sorry, Ma. she's still alive, very much so. Yeah, and I think that to me was what I looked for more than a bunch of postures. I wanted to be around someone of how they were living their life. What was I integrating into my life? And, watching a young boy at 5 years old come up on the stage and give her Parle G, the cookies that everybody gives to the dog. And she first looked and she's like, no. And then I watched her think about it, pause, and she's gave me the cookies. She took half of it, shared it with him. And I thought, this is cute. Like she's eating the dog biscuit. And it was just so that she didn't hurt his feelings. And I thought
Oh,
that's a teacher.
that's sweet.
That's yeah.
That's, I think, been my experience. You asked the question, Genny, about female teachers versus male teachers. And I'm not saying they have very different qualities. And obviously, let's just say that there's a masculine energy and a feminine energy and that, we kind of embody both. But I will say, I do find, Dina was the first female teacher that I had been with. And she was the first one that I felt confident, or not confident, I trusted enough to take a risk with, that I wouldn't be judged, that she wasn't looking. And I said, I think maybe I could start adding some of the third back. Like, I feel like I'd lost a lot of strength because I'd been, me perfectionist wasn't going to do anything that I couldn't do perfectly. And she said, let's see. And I remember that first day that I did some of them and she said, let's talk after. And this is something that was kind of bizarre, right? A teacher just says, let's go sit on the steps and talk. Like you were saying, Tara, with Saraswati, like, let's talk about this. Like, I know, she said, first of all, I'll never forget this conversation because it was exactly what I needed. She said, no, first of all, your practice is your practice. Nobody can take that away from you. It is yours. Number two, it feels like the only thing I can help you with, perhaps, is help you manage energy, because that's really where you are right now. It's an energetic thing. And maybe encourage, because it feels like maybe that you need as well. Just a little bit of encouragement. How does that sound? And I was like, there was my relief, Genny. Not when I hit menopause, but when finally somebody said, I'll hold, like, I'll be there for you. It was, and that was
almost like a permission,
yeah, it was like,
permission to explore by yourself.
and not be perfect and be okay. I can still belong. I can still, I can hold you. You don't have to hold it all. I can hold it with you. Wow.
Yeah. And I also think when you reach a certain age, and oftentimes that's because you've been practicing it for a while, so there's a maturity with the practice that you can kind of figure it out by yourself. Like I have been released from the strictures of, primary, second, third now because of the injury or because of life changes or because of, I've got to get to work. I only have an hour. Sometimes I might, for my third series, I might practice the first 3 postures and then skip all the arm balances and go up to Varichasana to finish it up to Ekapada, because I don't have time. I don't have 2.5 hours to spend on the mat doing everything. And it was a female teacher who's like, you don't have to do it that way, And I'm like, yeah, I don't. I've been doing this practice for, I don't know, 25 years or more. I actually can figure this out. It doesn't have to be one certain way. It should be the way that it can built into my life to manage my life, to support my life, so that everything else that happens after 6 a.m. I'm not going to be depleted because it is exhausting. Let's face it. If you're practicing that hard, that much, and you have a lot of other responsibilities between children, jobs, whatever it is, I can't beat myself with a stick anymore. And I used to do that, and actually I was okay because I had the physical capacity to do it. I don't have that anymore, and I don't have to. So and I think it was again a relief. Like I'm finding so much more relief in the practice than I used to. I'm not a slave to it. It's a slave to me. I don't slave is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. Like it helps me in all ways now because I've made the practice fit my life. Whereas previously, I think when you're of a certain age and you're still learning, there's a good reason why you follow that strict guidelines, right? That's what led me to where I am today. So I'm not saying that I don't think Ashtanga should be practiced in a certain way. I think that it evolves over time. It has to.
Yeah, well, didn't it also start like that? I mean, there's been so many modifications to the sequencing of itself, but if you look at it all the way back, I mean, like what you're saying is so beautiful, Jenny. Like the practice is supposed to serve you, not rule your life. And I think in this same space of that's why I became a yoga therapist, because if you go back to 1954 and look at it, somebody gets hurt in the class, you don't stop practicing. That's the last thing you should do. Yeah, there are many different things that you can do. You just have to know how to modify. You have to learn how to modify. Yeah, because what happens is if there's an injury, usually the mind starts going really wild. So how do I manage this? That's where the other practices, like Monica was saying, right? Pranayama, chanting, moving into the pratyahara, into dharana, which is, dharana, not just sitting there. I'll just leave that alone. But mostly people think that it's a mindless meditation, which of course it's not. It's looking at the old samskaras, rewiring and getting in deeper. But you can't do that unless you're able to sit still, unless your practice is complete. And Surya Namaskara, I'm sorry, 5 rounds and then seated is not a complete practice. And so you can make a beautiful mix. And I'll agree with the practice. I just turned 50 this or last year, and yeah, I have a beautiful mix of first, second, third, and yoga therapy, and I love my practice. I think it's beautiful, and that's what my body wants. I feel better in my body than I have in years. I'm not cupping and acupuncture looking to like hold my shoulder together or anything. I feel good, and I find I have some stability, and I'm able to look at when I don't have stability
Yeah,
and
I
then
think
take care of what I
that's
need. Yeah.
yeah, I agree completely. I think that the important thing is that our practice nurtures us. Because if it's not nurturing, then why are we even doing it? It's it's quite ironic that we have to, you know, that somehow the practice can at different stages, if you remain dogmatic that it has to be a certain way, then that is not going to work. Certainly having, practiced for, yoga for, I've lost count actually, but it's well over 40 years. And if you don't learn to listen, the big thing is learning to listen. And when you have such a strictly structured practice, you can't listen to your body because you're trying to make yourself fit into this set sequence. And
Absolutely.
yeah, when we look at life as well, so much of it is about learning to listen to the people around us, to the nature around us. This is such a huge lesson for all of us, is to listen. And if you're not doing that in your yoga practice, you're not really doing yoga.
Absolutely.
I don't know, you may as well be doing some military sequence.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the essence of everything, right? You're silencing the mind in order to be able to hear, in order to
Mm.
listen. This is like the essence. You know this as a chanting practitioner as well,
Yes,
right?
that's
That's the
right.
very first
Exactly.
thing. You can't chant without learning to listen. Yeah, there's no other way. And to be able to listen to our bodies and listen to yeah, everything, like how we're interacting, how we're moving. Otherwise, we're just pushing, pushing, pushing. And so that softening this. Okay, great. And there is no dogma in yoga. I'm just going to put that out there because I don't know where that comes from. Maybe if you're really undisciplined and wild and have no stability, wonderful. Maybe you need that for a little while, and maybe it's good
Yeah,
in the
I
beginning.
certainly needed that in my late teens, my 20s. I needed that because I was very scattered. Yeah, I really needed that. Yeah, and that's why there are different stages. Doing a fierce practice like a lot of us did initially is great when you're younger because you have excess energy that you need to channel in a positive way. And I know for me that, my practice really transformed my body in so many ways, especially because I came from an Iyengar background where the beauty of Iyengar yoga is you can just do what you're good at. And so I got to Ashtanga yoga and I was like, oh my God, upper body strength, what's that? And so I had to really balance my body out in many ways. And then I got to a point where, I had accidents in my life where I had to completely change what I was able to do. And the great thing was, I agree completely with you, Genny, that it's actually because I have a very challenging body. People just see pictures of me when I was younger doing fancy postures and think, oh, wow, you had it so easy. I never had it easy. But I did have a very flexible body in certain directions. And they were more my ultimate weakness, actually. And that's one of the reasons why I really teach a lot about hypermobility, because as you probably all have recognized that we have an overrepresentation of hypermobile people in our yoga communities. And, I'm always horrified when students tell me of their experiences where their teachers just encourage them to be more hypermobile instead of how to find strength and stability. Because hypermobility doesn't just stop at your tissues, it actually is your whole mentality and even your sensitivities. Hypermobile people tend to be greater empaths, which can be a blessing, but it also can be a weakness. And so, finding that balance. And I think ultimately we all do find the teachers that we need. I don't mean in an external teacher, but I mean within our own practice. We find those lessons, and that's the key, is consistency. Because I don't think it's so important what we ultimately do on our mat, but what is important are two things. One is that we actually have a commitment to our practice, that we do it every day. It's the showing up. It's that discipline that we all need. We all need discipline because we all have crazy minds. There are no exceptions if you're human. And so we all need that discipline, whatever it's going to be that day, whether it's just going to be to just sit and actually genuinely tune into your heart, that divinity within you for 5 minutes, even if that is worth more than getting on your mat and hammering yourself for 2 hours, I think.
Yeah, it's usually the people that get on their mats and hammer themselves are the ones that need to sit still, need to lie down in shavasana.
That's
Usually
true.
like that.
Yeah. And I think so. I think one, it's the discipline, and two, it's the learning to tune in and to listen, as we were saying before. Because, ultimately that is the reason that third limb is there, that we learn how to tune in and discover our essence, which is the same in each of us. We would have no wars. We would have no conflict. We would be able to really practice what Krishna was teaching in the Bhagavad Gita. And, it's actually really is about as simple as that, but it seems to be a hard thing for us all to come to. And I think that's one of the beauties of aging, is that you come more and more to that quiet realization that really the ultimate lesson is about love, about being able to find that love within us, that we can actually genuinely feel that for every other being.
Absolutely. There's a lot of layers to get through to get to that space. But
Yeah, I think there is, and I think there isn't, because for me, that was the biggest blessing of menopause, because, I started meditating when I was 19, and the great, and I always felt that I was like, my ADHD, just like, I always felt like I needed to meditate, but I never felt like I had a lot of success whilst meditating. I always had glimpses, and that was even enough because that kept me sane. However, when I hit menopause, it was almost like I could just go there immediately. I could just close my eyes, have that intention, and I could drop into that quiet place. So for me, that was the big blessing of menopause, was that, I don't know, it was like I had worked at this for so long, feeling that I wasn't really getting anywhere. And then it was like suddenly I had the benefits. I'm not quite sure how that works, but definitely that was the big blessing for me. It made menopause worth it. 'Cause I
Something that
didn't
I
have an
wrote
easy
down.
menopause.
Yeah, something I wrote
Yeah.
down in my journal, and something I've been like contemplating a lot is the idea of softness, and softness that we've always seen as weakness, or like always, even when we talk about discipline, it seems very hard, though not in the way you're describing it. But soft is receptive, and that's what I wrote down. Soft is receptive, and that's something that it's receptive to what's happening with you. It's receptive to what's happening with others. Um, it's that listening that you're talking about. And that's something that I had never, and that's a strength. So softness is a strength because,
Absolutely.
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I actually
And
believe that you can only be truly soft if you actually are strong.
That's the only way. That you have to touch that vulnerability,
Yeah.
touch that space, and yeah, to be able to sit in a place of softness requires such a stillness. It's great intelligence. And to remove all the other things. That's what I meant, like to remove the ego, to remove the idea of me, mine, this asmita, all the other things that are holding, yeah, before you can sit in that stillness that you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
well, I'm going back to Katy, because Katy, you're somebody who you said in the very beginning, what did you say about your practice? Mediocre? And that you're a, what did you call it?
It's not a very like I do, I jest and I joke about it.
I
It's
know
not a
you
very
do.
external. I mean, Monica, you talked about, coming from being, having mobility in one way. Like I was the student in Dandasana who couldn't sit upright. I came from so much stability where primary was a nightmare, still is in times. Intermediate is not much better, but yeah, it's been a process. So I joke about my practice more to make myself feel better, but
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you joke about it, Katy, because I really think that is part of the big problem, is that we judge our practice from the outside. I remember, years ago when we were still had our studio in Western Australia, and we had a student who was very unable to do most of primary series, but I considered him an advanced practitioner because he had been practicing with us for years, and he showed up. He was so dedicated, and he had a lot of inner stillness. So I think it's really unfortunate if we judge our practice from the outside. I think we need to judge ourselves, we don't need to judge ourselves at all, really, but monitor your inner qualities, because that's what's important. That's why we practice.
and this
That's
is where
the
the
entire
strength comes
essence
in
of
as
the
well,
practice.
isn't it? Sorry, Tara.
Go ahead, please. No, I
Um,
was just saying that's the essence of the whole practice. It's not,
mm,
it's to move from the external to the internal, to get into the quieter, quieter, quieter. Has nothing to do with jumping outwards continually, which is what all of that is. The asana, yeah, the striving, the craving. We all know this, right? The whole craving, aversion, raga, dvesha, binidesha.
Yeah,
that's
because
Kind of
actually
otherwise
focus.
we sorry.
no, that's where the strength comes in and the confidence, because so many practitioners, they have this idea of how the practice is going to be, and especially newer practitioners. And you have to know yourself pretty well to understand and listen to your body, right? You have new students and you say, okay, listen to your body, but they have so little understanding of who they are and what their body is. Then they can't, they don't feel they have the agency to make decisions for themselves. So, this is the confidence. I joke about my practice, but actually in my softness, I've taken matters into my own hands, right? I'm confident enough now to make decisions about my practice and about my body. This took a really long time, and it took leaving teachers, and it took being more comfortable with our own practitioner than a practitioner in a studio. That was such a process to get to a point where students in my physical standing get to.
I want to say that what attracted to me to you, I don't usually hold on to teachers in a classroom. I don't, and I don't usually, uh, that receptivity, that softness, what you brought into the room, that sweetness, it was not something I had regularly experienced in a Mysore room. And I am noticing it with a new generation, and I am noticing it specifically there's a shift happening, and it's so beautiful. I see it in my daughter. I felt it in you, and I hope that we're coming to that place where the rise of that feminine energy, that softness, that we see that as a strength, we see that receptivity. We're going beyond just pushing through and judging from the outside, but really moving towards that experiential yoga, which is what we're moving towards. And I just want to acknowledge it. Yeah, I want to say that out loud, because I was at a place at that moment where I really needed someone to hold me. And there were two people. One I called Mary Taylor, who has never taught me any asana. We've never done anything together, and cried with her and could be that. She was there for me as a teacher, as a woman, as a mother, as a friend, and someone I knew I could go to and be that for me. And then you held me in that room. And that was another beautiful experience. And so I'm realizing, as I get older, what the gift that we bring, this gift that we bring, even if it's under-recognized at the moment still, I think. I hope it doesn't, I hope we continue in that direction.
Peg, do you know, it's funny you talk about that moment. What you probably don't realize is I needed you as much as you needed me. I mean, that room, I was so out of my comfort zone. I think that we talked a little bit about this experience. I had assisted the previous season in Mysore, and I had a really intense, in hindsight, a good experience, but it did a lot of damage that season. And then I get to Miami as a practitioner. I'd taken weeks off of teaching because I had to have a break. And then I end up being chosen to assist in a room of people who I didn't feel comfortable with. My confidence level was at an all-time low. I was assisting in the first batch of all these incredible practitioners. And then when you held me, that's the thing. I think I needed a little bit of love just as much as you did in that moment.
Thank you all. I know this has been different times as I say this in every one of them. Monica, it's so late and so past your bedtime and I
Oh God, it is. I didn't know what time it
I
is.
know, I know. So
It's like
thank
a
you.
wild night out for me.
It's a night out with the girls.
That's right. That's right. It's actually been a real pleasure to meet you guys because I didn't know anybody apart from Peg. So
Yeah. And thank you, Peg, for organizing this. It's been really interesting.
It's
Yeah,
been
wonderful.
wonderful. Oh, thank you all.
Thank you.